I'm really excited and looking forward to it. I'll do a really quick intro on Rise, not to hold you back from the session that you've joined today. So Rise, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a global community of innovators working to create the future of financial services. We have 2 physical sites, so you will see Tony sitting in our London site in Shoreditch, and we also have one in New York as well. And we have a large global virtual community, in Mumbai in India as well, which is always expanding, and that's great. We run a wide range of events and programs that are all aimed at helping fintech startups grow, connect and scale, and this is a perfect example of one we have today. Where Mike Baliman will be taking us to entrepreneurial governance. Just one last thing for me, we do have a really exciting event coming up at the beginning of October too, which is looking at fundraising, which you might be interested in. So please do look on our Eventbrite and sign up for that too. That's on the 7th of October. I will hand you back to Tony, just a really quick intro for Mike, and we'll get the session started. Thanks, everyone.
And incidentally, Grace, Nick Lenz is attending today. And
I did notice that, yeah.
Yeah, well done. He's one of the panel for that event coming up. Anyway, let's talk about the main event, which is today. And I'm really, really happy, honestly, to have Mike here today. It's Rise Refresh, Entrepreneurial Governance 101, Creating a Successful Board. Now, thank you, Mike, for coming to do this. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Mike before he launches into this. And there's so much to say, but I'll condense it. So Mike is a non-executive, a board advisor, director with over 30 years board level experience in the financial services and technology and management consultant spaces. He's the founder and host of the London Fintech podcast, and he's also the author, and you'll see this later at the end of the presentation or the session, of the Realpolitik of the Unlisted Company Board. Mike, I could go on all day saying what you've achieved and what you're achieving, but it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you again for coming to us today to deliver this presentation. Over to you, buddy.
Thanks very much, Grace, and thank you, Tony. I think before we dive into the topic, this is, of course, a vast topic. I could talk at the same time this week for an hour for the rest of the year without repeating myself. So what I want to do today is a combination of 2 things. I want to get over the big picture things that anybody watching or listening today should never, ever forget. And then we can also have some questions which we intersperse during the middle, if it's appropriate, or at various stages or at the end, where we can dive down into some specific issues or challenges that you, or quotes, a friend of mine has this challenge with their board, and I can answer those. But before we get into it, I want to tell you a story about how I one day stumbled across the fact that this is a really interesting topic. Because as Tony said, I was on a board 30 years ago, and I've been on various boards for all that period of time. And my lived experience of that was mostly that it's just a sort of, at the beginning, it's sort of prestigious and all that kind of thing, but really it's just a meeting, isn't it? I mean, so what? I have a radically different view today. So if I tell you the story about how my view has changed, that will help, I hope, fire you with the same kind of passion that I've got, which is that, done well, your board can be heaven. It can be something that empowers you, makes your life better, makes you a better company, and makes you far more likely to be successful. Done badly, it can be hell. And there's a lot of limbo land in the middle. Let me tell you about that one. So anyway, a few years ago, maybe about 3-4 years ago now, I was at Lendit, the world's largest fintech conference, talking to a few buddies of mine about where fintech was going and all that. And about 3 years ago, it seemed to be losing steam. And I said, I was talking to a number of founders. I should go and do something else for a living, or gradually do less of this podcasting lark and go and do something like sitting on boards or stuff. And I was speaking to a bunch of well-known founders in London separately, and they all thought of, they all had a different comment. So some of them knew me as a fixed income guy, some knew me as a risk guy, some knew me as a podcast guy, all this kind of stuff. I'm used to that. It's the kind of the Sufi story about the elephant, depending on where the blind men have grabbed him in a room. So I'm used to that. But I was going home and I was thinking, that's a really weird thing. You know how the penny suddenly drops, and the penny dropped. Because I thought, it's not just me they have a different concept of. They all seem to have a different concept of what's the board for. And I thought, what's the board for? And I know all the legal blah, blah, the board is this, yada, yada, yada. I thought that's strange. Anyway, the next day, I thought, I know, I'll email a dozen founders, the ones I respect most in London, and say, hey guys, I was just scratching my head, and you all seem to have a different view of what the board's for. Fancy having a chat about the board. I sent the email off, and I promptly forgot about it. I mean, I literally forgot about it because these are guys who are so busy. You know what it's like being a founder, and these are super successful founders well down the course, that if I'd sort of emailed them saying, oh God, I forgot I owe you 50 quid, they would come back because they wanted their 50 quid, but it might take them a week or two because they've got a lot of other stuff to do beforehand. And then what happened was that within 24 hours, all 12 came back to me. Now, that is the most striking thing, and I want you to remember that, because that actually is a key that unlocks this door as to why this is a super interesting topic as well as a super important topic. So I spoke to them one by one, and I was totally unprepared for what happened. It was like having 12 therapy sessions. These guys just unloaded so much stuff on me that they hadn't been able to share with anybody else. Fortunately, they all trust me. One reason it's called the Realpolitik of the small company board is that all the quotes are anonymous. They're anonymous for the following reason. People can be blunt about what's really happening. So, for example, on the blurb of the book, the archetypal quote about the board is a founder, I'm sure virtually all of you would know his name, who, when I asked what his board's like, he said, my board meetings are shit. That's what I mean by Realpolitik. That's what I mean about having anonymous sources. It's the only book where it's got 400 quotes in it, and there's no names next to any of them, so people can say that. Now, you guys may have noticed that despite everyone's best endeavour, sometimes life doesn't work out. Sometimes things go badly. Sometimes your life is shit or your board is shit. So really, my whole mission is to find out what kind of things led people towards hell, what kind of thing led people towards heaven. And in terms of this emotiveness, in terms of this therapy kind of session, what was clear was that the founders, in general, can have a lot of tension built up inside them because they have to be kind of Janus-like. They have to face two ways. So the traditional thing is, the archetypal thing is, if you're doing a round, anyone's done a few of those will know that it's a good bunch of laughs for a while, or especially when you're successful, but maybe not during the middle. You can be tossing and turning at 4 o'clock in the morning when things are going badly, just not sleeping, wide awake, and that you have the 4 o'clock in the morning thoughts that, oh God, it's a disaster, it's all over. I've got to tell my partner, I've got to take the kids out of school, I've got to sell the house, I've got to go into the office and tell them, look, it's all over, guys, all 50 of you, sorry, you're all fired because we've got no money, it's a disaster. So you're having these thoughts, bound to have these thoughts if you keep doing rounds, you're bound to have these thoughts and feelings. And then what happens? You wake up in the morning, and go, oh, and you walk in the office, go, hi guys, yeah, it's all going great, let's make it all happen today, And depending on who these founders had around them, on their board or advisors or mentors, a lot of them had never really been able to share that. They had to turn up to their firm and going, yeah, it's going great, let's make this happen. They turn up at their board, we can come back to the nuances of this. They turn up to the board and say, yes, well, there's always challenges doing it around, but I'm quite confident, he says with their mouth, you see. I did so anyway, and then I spoke to another dozen folks. They took 2 days to get back, and they had the same things as well. And I thought, okay, there's really something here. And in the meantime, I found out they all had different concepts of the board. At the end of that process, I've spoken to 80, I've now spoken to over 100 founders, chairmen, listed board companies, unlisted board companies, and written a book. If any of you ever write a book, got a super tip here, don't release it the week before lockdown, because it really impedes your ability to run around London talking about it. So let me give you the thing that I don't want you to forget. I'll repeat it again. The board, based on me speaking to 100 people with boards, can be heaven, it can be hell, or it can be limbo in the middle. Now, why? Why does it go like this? I mean, it's a kind of relationship, nobody tells you at school that actually having a nice relationship where you two get on really well, and are happy and great sex life and all that kind of stuff is important. You kind of work that out for yourself. So why does it not work out when it comes to the board? Well, I think there's 3 reasons it doesn't work out. The first is ignorance. I've been on boards, as Tony said, for a long time, but I hadn't really appreciated what an excellent board is like. Actually, I mentioned sex life. Let's use that as an inappropriate metaphor because it might stick in the mind. Imagine you go around and you interview 100 people about their sex lives. You get out of that, you go, oh, wow, I never realized that sort of swinging from the chandelier dressed up as Spider-Man could be so much fun. You come away with so many good ideas, And also you find that you're probably in the middle of the pack. There's lots of people doing things better, lots of people doing it worse, but you come away having crowdsourced the real intelligence. And so many first-time founders don't know, and actually I found that quite a few serial founders take quite a while, perhaps, to find out that the board can really empower them. The second reason, especially in FS actually, that people get it wrong is that people might have big company board experiments, like I did back in the day. If you sit on a HSBC or Barclays or some other company, it's a very different world from the world of the startup. Very briefly, there are many reasons for this, one of which is regulation. Don't want to touch too much on that one today, but it's always been the way, because if you're a startup, you've got two rocks and you bang these two rocks together and you get a little spark. And with that little spark, if it's left to itself, it's going to go out. So you get a bit of tinder, you blow on it, and you're trying to get this fire to grow and grow and grow. It's all about corporate creativity. So one of the main things the board can help you with is to get that spark going and build a bigger and bigger fire. So your board, if it's an engine of growth, your board's function is to help you grow that fire in a small company, in a startup, because it'll left to itself will go out. Take something like HSBC, where the board was hauled over the select committee a few years ago or something like that. They have the opposite problem. The fire isn't going to go out. What's more likely to happen if you're sitting on the board of HSBC is some office in some country you've never heard of blows up and suddenly you're in front of a select committee. So by the time you're a mega company, your concern is that you've got really hot fires, really big pressure in the boilers, and the most likely thing to happen in your factory is it explodes. And then they're going to be going, oh, it's you. You're on the board. Tell me what you did about it. Whereas that really doesn't apply in a startup. In the famous metaphor, I'm sure you've all heard, which is that in America, if you've got a small fire, they will throw petrol on it to see whether you can make a big fire or an explosion. In the UK, they will throw cold water on it and see whether you can survive the cold water, changing slightly. So ignorance, big company experience. And then the third thing, which is, look, you go, okay, Mike, I get it. Yeah, boards are really important. I understand that. But you know what? I'm a founder. Everything's important. The tech is important. The marketing is important. The sales is important. The office is important. The recruitment is important. Everything's important, and I can't do everything at the same time. Now, on these three things, let me tell you what serial founders, almost to a man and to a woman, said. They know that a good board can support them and their company, and therefore, right from the start, they set out to get a good board. What does that kind of mean? Let's forget the word board for a minute. There are some people out there who are never going to work for you, who are never going to come in 25 days a month, 8 hours a day and work for you. But they might come in an hour a month or 3 hours a month or 3 hours every 3 months. And these are people who can really add value because they've got something that you don't have in your company. They may have done the journey before. They may have great contacts. They may have some technical expertise in scaling up or something that you've never done. So serials founders prioritize it for the beginning, and they aim for heaven. They've experienced the fact that it's an engine of growth is the mentality, is that you've got a small fire, and as a startup founder, you're trying to get that fire to grow and grow and grow and not be blown out. So they make that a priority. Now, even though they're super busy, because they've experienced what it's like to have people around you who support you, who enable you, and who challenge you sometimes, it's like a good friend is somebody who will say to you, do you know what, Mike, I think you've been drinking a bit too much recently, haven't you? Yeah. Well, not really. Yeah, you have. Well, okay. So it's not just a question of being given the love all the time and told you're wonderful and all that kind of stuff. So they do it like that. Now, most important thing, and the one thing I don't want you to forget is, what's the one key to all this? The one key to all this is a quote by Jim Rohn. It says, if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into someone else's plan. And guess what they've planned for you? Not much. And now that's what happens to most people's boards. Most people will have a formal board. I mean, look, I'm a company. I've been a company for 22 years. I've been independent, but it's me. It's a pro forma board. The accountant sends me something saying there's a board meeting and you paid yourself this dividend. It's not a real thing. And on day one man and a dog in a pub go, oh, I've got an idea for a company. They started the next day. You don't need a board the next day. So it is not your immediate priority like that. So what happens, going back to the Jim Rohn, which is if you don't have a design for your own life, for your own company board, is that you'll stumble into somebody else's plan for you. So what happens to founders? Friends and family, maybe you've got co-founders around you, what will happen is that you'll get angels. Now, angel in itself is something which you should have a whole 1 hour on a rise at angeling. But briefly, there's a spectrum of angels from capital A angels. I've met people who said, I've got this guy on my board, I don't pay him anything. He does he's chairing it or something for free. And my life would not have been the same without him. Every day I thank God that he exists. You have that kind of angel, capital A angel, as I call them. And then you have small a angels, which is somebody in the city who's paid a big bonus and for tax reasons puts something into your thing because it's SEIS, and by some mistake you let him on the board, and this guy might know everything about the swaps market or whatever in some mega bank, but he has got no experience of the startup world, no experience of growing something, and he just sort of clutters up in the way. And then a worse variant of that is somebody who's retired because they made loads of money, so they give you money, think, oh, I need money, and then they sit on the board and they clutter it up, and it can be very difficult doing VC rounds and all that kind of stuff. So you stumble into that. And then, of course, for most, at some point, you stumble into having a VC, venture capitalist, and your mileage may vary, I think is the polite phrase on that. Some VCs are really good at governance. Very few are. Most VCs are there to look after number one, which is the VC firm. They're not there to look after you. The podcast I just released today is with Forward Partners, early stage, super early stage VCs, about how to IPO. They've IPO'd recently. It went quite well for them. One of the reasons they've IPO'd, along with one or two others like Augment and the like, is that they can do patient capital. Because otherwise, if your VC is coming from a fund, this fund's got 7 years life, it may have 5 years to go, they're going to want the money back in 5 years' time, regardless of where your company is, which is going to put you in a tricky situation. So, yes, the best VCs can tell you how to govern well, and governing really means to be creative in a startup. But a lot of them are there for themselves. So people can stumble into this. I don't know whether Grace or Tony, you've got a track of questions. If there's 1,000 questions, maybe we address one or two before moving on, or we can move on. But the big picture thing is, look, if you believe me about one thing today and one thing only, a great board will really change your life and your company's life. Your founders, your entrepreneurs, you can go away if necessary, even if the thing dropped dead now, and work out, oh, actually, I believe that guy, and work out how to do it. But the most important thing is that a lot of people go, oh, yeah, I know that, but I'm a bit busy. But if you really, really understand it, serial founders do, then you think, okay, look, I don't need a board now, but I want a couple of advisors around me, or I want to tee up somebody, for the future as chairman and things like that. You approach the problems in advance. Tony, are there any questions, or do you want to?
No, I've got a few, but I'll go straight to the audience. If anyone's got a question in the audience at this stage, please unmute and fire away, please.
Right, while they're firing away, you can interrupt me if someone's fired, because I don't know how this software is working.
No, it's all right. I'm listening here, Mike. Okay, I've got one here that came in earlier. It said, when should you look at refreshing your board members? Because I know certainly friends of mine have said to me that some of their board members get a bit stale in position. So when should you look at that potentially?
It's a very good question, and your choice of timing shows that your crystal ball is working very well and you're psychic, because I was about to say. The second point about the board is that the board is not what I call, it's not a set and forget. You don't go away from this and go, oh yeah, I think Mike's right, and then tomorrow you create a great board. You go, oh great, tick box, I've got a great board now. It's like, I've got a nice card, I've done that, and I'll move on in life. Startup is all about the growth curve. Yeah. So obviously the best thing you can do in a company is have a great chairman. Chances are that as a small startup, relatively early in the stage, you ain't going to get a great chairman. Most of the great chairmen I spoke to said that being a chairman reminded them of having a new baby, a little toddler. You've got to teach it to walk, you've got to change the nappies, you've got to tell it to do its homework, the basics. And this came up from several people, so this is independently said. So a great chairman that's chaired big companies is going to be really hard to seduce to chair your little company at the beginning, because he's taught people how to read and write and basic stuff like turn up and work hard and go to bed and be nice to your mum and all that kind of stuff. So you can't get the best board members at the beginning. So what you're going to have to do is rotate as time goes by. Now, there are various phases in this. So as I say, you've got friends and family, and then you've got your angels and these things, and you want to rotate them. And just like in your business, you want to be upgrading as time goes by. So I know another founder who'd said to me at some stage after a raise, it's all the great thing about the C round, he said, is that after the B round, we got a really good tech team. He said, after the C round, we've got a really, really good one now. You know, we've rotated it. And to a metaphor that will stick in your mind, Tony, is that challenge is often managed badly by people. For want of one simple phrase, actually, tour of duty. Yeah. You come on my board tomorrow, Tony, and I say, I'm gonna expand the London Fintech podcast. I'm gonna have 100 podcasts around the world. I'm gonna go global. I want a board member, and I think a guy with your kind of hairstyle is the person I want on the board. If I do that, and you sit there, and I give you nice tea and biscuits, and you quite like coming along and seeing Mike and the other people you meet, that's great. You're going to carry on, and you're never going to sort of cross your mind that you might actually leave. Whereas if I say, Tony, I think you can really help me at this early startup stage because you have Rise experience. So I want you on the board at the beginning. Chances are I will need a different person in 2 or 3 years' time. Yeah. So if we get to that stage, if everything goes well, we're going to get to that stage, you're going to make yourself redundant because I'm going to want a guy who's done lots of scale ups, and then I'm going to want guys who've done IPOs. So if up front you do the tour of duty concept, then the expectations from the beginning are not that, I'm going to be there forever. I quite like doing this. I quite like seeing Mike every month. And then you're really upset when one day Mike says, well, been lovely seeing you, Tony. Thanks very much. Goodbye. So yes, that's the main thing, the tour of duty. And you definitely need to rotate it because the startup board, the scale-up board, the growth company board, and definitely the pre-IPO board is a topic in itself, actually. When Trude tried to go to the war is the section of the book about that. Hat tip to Frankie Goes to Hollywood. They are very different boards as time goes by, not least of which because in your pre-IPO board, you need a board that looks much more like a listed board and the whole hell that is the 24 corporate governance codes that have been created. You need remuneration committees and audit committees and all that kind of paraphernalia, which really slows things down.
Excellent. Is there any other questions from attendees before we crack on? We've got some good people on here, so there must be some questions.
Yes, hello, I have a question.
Awesome.
How do you start actually attracting the first few members when you want to create the board and manage those expectations?
Very good question. And in terms of the past 18 months, is it Chrissy? Sorry, couldn't see you. Oh, right.
Hi.
In terms of the last 18 months when I've been speaking to people and helping them specifically with the board and the challenges, the most common thing is, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, no, I get it. I bought your book. I didn't read all of it because I'm a bit busy, but I flipped through some of the chapters that really I like. But how do I do that? And my answer to that is that you have to start where you are, and everybody knows some people. So on day one, if Tony and I form a new business together, we'll say, well, who do you know, Tony? Who do I know? And so you need a list. Once you're a pre-IPO board, you can have headhunters and lists of candidates and blah blah blah. But at the beginning, you can really start with what you've got. And then, in terms of how do you do it, one of the key strengths, one of the key features of being a successful entrepreneur, especially serial entrepreneurs. I mean, the most useful people I've spoken to on the podcast, but also wearing my board hat, have been serial entrepreneurs, because you can do something well once. I've done things well in my life. Think, hey, I'm cool, but it turned out that actually the wind and the tides were blowing in the right direction. And even though I could sail my yacht, the fact there was a following wind, it really helped. And other times I've done the same thing and the wind was in my face and I haven't got anywhere. Is the ability to attract, seduce, and retain talent. Now that question is the same as to whether you're after a CMO, a CTO, a chairman, a non-executive, a mentor, an advisor. So how do you attract and seduce talent as a whole? That's a subject for a 1-hour chat in itself. But clearly, one of the things is that you've got a vision about how you want to change the world, even if it's in a tiny way. I want to make payments 1,000% cheaper. That will benefit the world. Okay, well then you've got a vision, and people who are into that vision are going to be attracted by it. And in terms of the board, the key appointment is really a chairman. The best thing a startup founder can get is a really good chairman, is somebody that knows the ropes. and there's someone that can protect you from, in a sense, protect you from the capital providers. And going back to protection, I'll give you a story that there's a 30-year venture capitalist I spoke to, a guy. And at the end of it, I said, if Mr. X, if your nephew or niece was starting a company tomorrow and it grew quickly and they needed a board, what advice would you give them, having been a VC for 30 years? He said, I'd give them one piece of advice. And he said, I would tell them, make sure you get somebody on the board who understands VCs. So when, and he used the word when, not if, so when the VC has a tantrum, he knows how to handle it. You've got somebody there.
Yeah.
Come back to your point. It's, in a sense, it's no different from seducing other parts of your senior team. In a sense, you delegate upwards to the chairman, the board, and a good chairman will sort that out for you. And you delegate downwards to the CTO and CMO, and therefore you need to seduce them in a sense. Attract them. It's like how does a flower attract a bee?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Is there any more questions?
Thank you.
Good. Okay. Well, maybe just talk. We mentioned the chairman. Well, let's talk about. We mentioned the board. So the board will change over the time. The most important thing you need to understand is that it needs managing over time. The board that suits your company today will not be the board that suits your company in 5 years' time, will not be the board that suits your company in 10 years' time. In terms of the...
Can I interrupt? I switched off my video because my PC is struggling, but I'm interrupting just in, if the board members or board of directors are shareholders and you can't get rid of them, then what do you do?
So I'm pausing because that covers so many different scenarios. I think that the super big picture, it's all about control. So founders who've gone a long way and done D rounds and stuff and still control the company are in a very different position from those who lost control a long time ago. If Tony and I form a new company tomorrow and we're desperate for money to get going, and on day 2 we give 51% of the company away to somebody else, to you, Chrissy, you buy 50%, 1% of the company, so I'll give you 100 grand, 51%. Then what's happened already right at the beginning is Tony and I are actually employees. It's not our company anymore. Now, if you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, Amazon's a prime example with Bezos or Google and that, they use all sorts of devices to retain control, so it's their business. If it's your business and you have control, okay, well, there's a level of detail here around terms and conditions and board terms of reference and all that kind of legally jazz, consult your lawyer kind of thing. But basically, if you've got control, you can always sort your board out because you can just sack the lot. You could, in extremis, sack yourself and go, hey, I've got my strengths, but I'm not the guy. And so I know quite a few companies where the founders have decided, actually, I'm not a CEO, and I will hire a good CEO, and I will hire a chairman. So if you have control, you can do what you like, by and large. Otherwise, there's a lot of challenges that people meet, especially if they've got angels that are holding the company back, and they don't want to do a fundraise and the voting and all this kind of thing. So the real issue is one around control. Once you've lost control, you're an employee is the reality. So you can't do that much about it. So for example, I know a firm that was making very good profits, 7-figure profits in Fintech, which is pretty phenomenal because I've forgotten the stat now, but it's like 98% of Fintechs are losing money. They were making really good money. Their board was undiverse in the old-fashioned sense, which it was the 2 founders and the VC, and that was it. And they said that we want more diversity on the board in terms of diversity of thought. We want people with different positions. We want people from different industries to try, and the VC said, no, this is my company, was his exact phrase. And they, by that stage, had lost voting control of the company, and they couldn't do much about it. Now, I advised them, and I said, well, actually, yes, you screwed it up by putting all your eggs in one basket. You lost voting control, but in which case, you've got to try and then use your soft power. We cheesed that. The VC needed a realization for his fund because his other investments hadn't been doing very well, probably because the guy was sort of a jerk, not very nice to founders. And I said, well, look, he wants to sell this business. Your business is not going to be very saleable if the two founders disappear and take a few of the team with it. So, I suggest you have a Realpolitik conversation outside the boardroom, saying, look, this is where we are. What can we do? So, I asked this question of a very good serial founder. I said, what do you do if you've lost control and things are going badly and all that kind of stuff? And he said, there's one good answer for that, which is it's a bit like asking the question that you're sitting under Westminster Bridge, drinking meths in the gutter. You're a street person. What do you do then? He said, well, the answer is you never let yourself get into that position, because once you're there, it's very tough to get back.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
Is there any more questions? I'll let you crack on, buddy, because I've still got a couple of questions here we can interject at any time.
So just very briefly, skimming over the main areas of the board. In terms of the CEO, look, I spent the last 7.5 years or something entirely doing podcasting. I was in Fintech a couple of years before that. So basically, I spent a decade, my entire life, dealing with founders and all that kind of thing. And I had a relatively decent understanding of what it's all about, I thought. But as I say, the thing that came over to me about founders is how emotionally stressful the journey is, and how a lot of them have to bottle that up, and a lot of them have to. The Japanese have got these phrases, I always get them confused: onomai and tatamai. There's the public face, and then there's a private face. There's the one when you're looking in the mirror and shaving and putting your makeup on or something like that, and then there's one you show the world, and that's really can be a strain for founders. So one of the best things for founders, some co-founders, it works well. There's at least two of you. You can go for a drink together and go, oh my God, it's a disaster, isn't it? Yeah, I was tossing and turning at 4 o'clock. So someone once gave me a statistic saying that statistically speaking, it's better to have a co-founder. Well, yeah, but so what? It depends who. It's a bit like saying, statistically speaking, I might be better if I'm married. Yes, well, it's not a question of being married per se. Who am I married to? So we've had many stories, of course, in tech and in all sorts of companies where the founders have fallen out, and then that's worse than being a single founder. But the best thing you can do as a founder is have somebody you can speak to. Ideally, that is your board. Now there are various stages of maturity that you can get to in your company, and one is where your board is sufficiently good, sufficiently trustworthy that you can turn up and tell them the truth. Now, you can't go and lie to your board, but there's always sins of omission, and there's always ways that you put things over and spin it. Now, this is in part due to who's on the board. So plenty of founders I know have VCs on the board. They'll throw their toys out the pram if you miss a KPI by 1%, or that it's not so much the VC firm as everyone says. Actually, the worrying thing is the late 20-something VC is sort of, he's on the make, and he's going off to space, and he wants to be a partner and all this kind of thing. But he's never run a business at all, and his only thing is sort of giving us a kicking. He's got no idea of creativity. With him, we have to present things in the proper way. So we discussed before the meeting how we're going to present it. So there's that kind of thing. Or if you've got a mature partner or just a good partner on the board or chairman, is a board where you turn up. Ideally, you want a board where you turn up and say, well, this C round's a bit of a bloody disaster so far. We've seen 50 VCs. They all think it's rubbish. I'm really out of ideas, guys. And to be honest, my morale's sinking. I haven't slept for a week. I'm drinking too much. If you can have that kind of relationship with your board, and they are mature, experienced people, then it makes it so much easier for them to help you. Oh yeah, I've been in that situation myself, or blah blah blah, and that. Now, it's not just a question of the board. It's not just a question of the founder. It's the two together. So a serial founder who's created business in Chicago, created businesses over here, he gave me a great quote. He said, "I've had some boards where, frankly, I just go and tell them what they want to hear." He said, "I've had some boards where I turn up and tell them it's all a disaster." It really varies. Now, if you've got the kind of board where you don't feel comfortable being completely honest about your hopes and your fears, you just tell them the hopes and you say, I'm going to do my best. Yes, we've got issues. Of course we've got issues, but you don't tell them what your fears are. Then you can maybe have advisors, advisory directors, the whole topic in itself on the side, or have mentors. But the one thing that came out is that it's really, really important. If you want to be a founder for 5 or 10 years, it's like anybody can start by sprinting. You'll all have found that out so far. I did this at school once in a cross-country race. There's some cocky school captain who was, I thought I was going to outrun him on the first lap, so I outran him on the first lap. I was in agony for the rest of it, so I learned the hard way that you can't sprint a cross-country race. So the best thing you can do outside the board, on the board, whatever it takes, is get somebody you trust and you can speak to and you can be honest, because it doesn't do you any good, it doesn't do your firm any good, it doesn't do your shareholders any good, it doesn't do your staff any good if you're bottling up stuff and you're spinning around at 4 a.m. in the morning, not sleeping, and you've got nobody to share it with. So that's the CEO. I'd really like to emphasize the emotional aspect and the support aspect there. In terms of the honesty with the board, the board does feel itself a bit like a parent at times. So, by the time that you're going to secondary school, they expect you to be able to tie up your own shoelaces and not cry too much when you fall over. When you're 5 years old, they'll expect you to cry when you fall over. So there is a maturing. And then by the time you're enlisted, they'll forget this. Oh, I'm a bit worried. I'm a bit upset stuff. No. You don't do that on footsie boards. You turn up and say, whoa, and speak with a deep voice. That's the board. The chairman, I've emphasized the chairman is super important. I've got some resources later. There's a free slideshow I've done on the complex CEO chairman dynamic and relationship and how to recruit the right kind of chairman. Crudely put, in a simple caricature that many of you may know, some of you may not, is that, as somebody put it to me, on day one, in a startup, the CEO hires and fires the chairman. In a FTSE, when you've done your IPO, when you're worth hundreds of millions, the chairman hires and fires the CEO. And there's a dynamic that goes along there. And at some point, the seesaw tips. So, for example, people who've hired pre-IPO chairman, the kind of chairman that AIM or FTSE would appreciate, a couple of those told me stories, and they said, well, since getting insert name of big heavy hitter who'll be on the front page of the FT as my chairman, it's amazing. I've actually never felt so supported. This guy really supports me. He really empowers me. But, and they all said this, but I know there's going to be a day when there isn't. I know there's going to be a day when he wheels into the boardroom, the guillotine, and what do you do around that? So one of the best pieces of advice around that is when you're recruiting such a chairman, when you've got to that stage where the chairman's the person that's going to fire you rather than you're going to fire the chairman, as many do when they're at the beginning, for example, for just being too bureaucratic, for not being creative enough. Corporate creativity, not corporate governance, is what you need at the early stages. Is have the conversation beforehand. If I'm hiring a pre-IPO chairman, I'll say, look, we all know the reality of this, is that back in the day, I could have hired and fired you. Well, not you, because you wouldn't have worked for me back then, but somebody else. But also in the future, you're going to be the one that fires me. When Legal and General and the shareholders are causing fuss, I'm going to be the one you shoot first rather than shooting yourself. And have you had that situation before? How has it worked for you then? What did you do? Do you have informal conversations? So just again, it's a bit like the conversation with Tony, tour of duty. Tony, I'd like to be on my board for 2 or 3 years. If we don't succeed very much, maybe a bit longer, but actually we'll succeed faster, maybe a bit less. Same thing with the chairman. And in terms of recruiting a chairman in general, a good firm I spoke to said that actually the most useful thing, and they're on their 4th chairman actually. They were upgrading, but also some of them didn't fit. So one of them was someone that had done it before. I've done what you've done, Mike, but I've done it a millionfold, and I can teach you a thing or two. And I've given up sort of being an executive, and now I'm going to be a chairman. So they took such a guy, and he had an enormous amount to teach them, but he'd never actually practiced being a non-executive. So even though he was the non-executive chairman on his business card or whatever, he would keep grabbing the steering wheel. Now these founders still had control, so they sacked him because look, we're the CEOs or whatever they call themselves. You're the chairman. Anyway, they were getting the 4th chairman, and the best piece of advice of that was that board issues, senior governance issues, big picture issues with a company that you've struggled with in the past or not done so well with, or your prior chairman didn't do so well with. When you're doing the interview, just ask them, hey, we had this thing, we had this round, we had this challenge. How would you have handled that? And it reminded me a little bit of in tech world these days. When I got a job back in the day, I turned up and I sort of chatted, and they gave me a job at Kleinwatts for chatting. Well, I'm still doing it, I guess, decades later. But apparently these days, if I want to go into tech, actually my first job was in tech. So I turned up to get my first job in tech in Bath back in the day. And I chatted, and they went, okay, you got the job. And then I sort of sit down and I tap on the computer like this. And fortunately, I tapped okay on the computer, but they wouldn't have known from me chatting. So these days, of course, in tech, you have coding tests. You set them down and say, you knock off a program in the next 5 minutes to do the first million prime numbers or whatever it is you set them. So in the same way with NEDs, with chairman, investment directors, put them through a few scenarios beforehand. Don't just go, oh wow, you're cool. You must know some stuff. Ask them how they handle this. How would you cope with this situation? How would you cope with that situation? And then, slightly touching on your point, Chrissy, which is that, how do you seduce them? Well, I think one important thing is not to set your sights on somebody and then try and seduce them. It's a bit like, oh, I need a new partner. I think, oh, that person over there, they look like the right one. I'll go and get them. There's a whole period of dating and mating. So generally, if you're trying to get a good chairman, they ain't going to suddenly leap on board. They'll want to know you a bit. Nick Brisbane, Forward Partners CEO on the podcast today, he said there's a cliche in venture capital: invest in lines, not dots. So doing their IPO, it took them 3 years from start to finish and first thinking about it. He said one of the benefits of that is that the potential advisors met us 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months. So they've got a trajectory. They understand each other. There's a hell of a lot of chemistry. There's a hell of a lot of relationship about this. That you know this anyway about being founders. You can spend more time with your business and your business colleagues than you can with your romantic partner. In the same way that in life or in a family or something, you want a really good partner because when things go tough, you can just hang together and you're going to sort it. In the same way, it's relationships at the board. So it's not just a question of finding this guy is a great guy. He's got a fantastic CV. He's got this expertise. He's got these contacts. He's got all this kind of stuff. No, it's got to be somebody you get on with. It's like the one thing I've always done about the podcast is remember Lemmy's advice. Lemmy from Motorhead, God rest his soul, who said, play your music, and your audience will find you, which is the opposite from the general marketing perspective, which is, hey, this is the podcast of 34-year-old soccer moms in Midwest, and what do they like? I'm going to give them what they like. Play your music, just be yourself. So on my podcast, right from the beginning, I decided that I want to make a Marmite podcast. I want to be me. Lots of people aren't going to like that. That's great. See, if people don't like me, people don't like what I'm talking about, fantastic, because some people are going to love it. What I don't want to be is lift music. What I don't want to be is bland and inoffensive, and that's where Lemmy came from. And I don't think Lemmy ever made lift music. Although if you eat too much cheese and red wine late at night, you probably have a dream where Motorhead of the lift music and the lift gets stuck too loud. Nick, you've got a question.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for that. That's really useful so far. Just a question around board composition and what the sequencing of that is in your experience, what tends to work, what doesn't perhaps. So I've been in a number of circumstances where small startup starts with a number of advisors, then appoints a number of board members without necessarily appointing a chairman de facto. And then there comes a point where, a chairman is deemed to be necessary and is then appointed, etc. Just interested in your perspective on whether perhaps startups should actually think the reverse and perhaps have something in mind for a chairman position first and then start to construct board. And the second question, Mike, is very much around the chairman positioning, because their task is quite challenging in the sense that on the one hand, they have to be supportive of the CEO, but equally, they've got to hold the CEO to account and challenge them. So I'm just wondering, with the appointment of a chairman, in your experience, is that often best done from within the existing structure, for example, a non-exec or an advisor who knows the company and then grows into that position? Or actually, is there merit to have an external, fresh pair of eyes who comes in from the external?
very good question. And obviously you're speaking from a sort of realpolitik perspective of having lived this yourself and having found that sometimes you're driving on a road and it's a bit sort of stony and there's potholes and you're thinking, hang on, was there a road that was a bit better tarmac than this? Well, first thing I thank you for is that you've illuminated the point I was just making, which is that one of the things you can do with advisory directors. Tony and I have got this new business tomorrow. We don't want a board. Even I don't want a board tomorrow. But actually, I do know that actually, we get Nick and we get Chrissy around us, and we see them once a month for a coffee or a beer or whatever. That they're going to give us some useful support. So really soft, informal founders. But by doing that process, going back to the seducing, going back to the dating and mating, when I was 15, if some girl smiled at me at school and go, "Oh, that's all right, that's good enough for me." I'm a few decades older. Smiling at me is just like, that's not even first base. This could be a whole process before, one's in a relationship. So the try before you buy thing is brilliant. So you've got these advisors, and when you're getting towards the formal board stage, you know who you get on with, you know who you add value, you know who sort of you're simpatico with. So you're doing the right thing by that. The other part of your question, I would answer by saying that everything you say, of course, is correct, but rather like a graph, you've missed the time axis out. So let's say Tony and I have got a startup now. In 10 years' time, we do an IPO. So at the beginning, we have advisors around. We gradually formalize the board. One of the reasons for doing that is in terms of helping you raise capital. One of the best pieces of advice I got, only from 2 or 3 people, which is early on, just get the sort of company secretary from your accountant to come in for a couple of hours. Have a set of board minutes. There's nothing that impresses a VC more when you go and do your first raise in 3 years' time. And, oh yes, these are all our board minutes for the last 3 years. Oh wow, gosh, you're taking this seriously. And that's one thing that serial founders do, going back to doing a proper board from the beginning. Even look, they're not stupid. They know an early startup doesn't mean much, even if it needs just half a sheet of A4 at the beginning. We had a board meeting. We discussed the fact we got no tech department or whatever. And, it shows that you're thorough and systematic. It gives them confidence that putting money into people who are thorough and systematic about their business. One of the problems, I haven't forgotten this about Chairman, but one of the problems that founders can get into, especially in the early stage, and again, this is something the good chairman can help with, which is that founders, of course, are focusing on a product. You need a product or a service the world wants, and that's really tough to create one of those. Yeah. But you never sell the product in the end. You sell your company. You float your company. You trade sell your company. So there needs to be a gradual increase in importance as time goes by in the fact that actually what you're really doing is you're creating a company.
Yeah, so that governance piece is actually really important.
Yeah. The governance piece is really important. So coming back to squaring all these circles and going back to my time dimension like this, what many people do that I spoke to is at the beginning exactly like that. You have a bunch of advisors. Some of them work better. Get into a formal board at some stage, which has its own benefits. Founders can be reluctant to have a chairman there. A lot of that can be overdone. I mean, again, you need a lawyer for this stuff, especially when you get involved with VCs. I mean, the BVCA standard agreement is 24 pages, and all of that is, of course, about legging the founder over and leveraging up their strength and their position and all that kind of, black magic. And the phrase black magic came from VCs. It isn't my phrase. It's their phrase. And ideally, just have somebody, let's say Tony's a non-exec who has been an advisor, now he's a non-exec, and you're the CEO. Well, Tony, do you fancy chairing the meeting? And all he's got to do is chair a bloody meeting, and you can do a bloody diploma in chairing and boards these days. It's just completely insane. But all you want is somebody who sits there within minutes and goes through and all that kind of stuff. And then as time goes by, depending on your funders, depending on your angels, depending on the VCs and that kind of stuff, what generally happens is that when you're going up the scale, angels and then VCs, at some point they're going to say, no, we want a proper founder. Yeah, Tony is a good bloke, but no, we want a real chairman, proper chairman. We want a real chairman chairing the board. At which point they start to take over a little bit about the governance. And in terms of the chairman's actual role, this is why I'm talking about realpolitik at the board. The realpolitik at the board is, look, there's all this company law stuff and all that, and there's 24 corporate governance reports, all of which, apart from one actually, which are applying to small co's, are for listeds. The reality is the company vote. If you and chums have still got the vote, then nobody has power over you. Mm-hmm. And even in the scenario I gave before, even if unfortunately you've lost power and people do have power over you, well, again, it's all about the company, not the product. And if, a key team goes, so there can be a realpolitik negotiation, over a bottle of whiskey, which is, look, this is where we are. We've got a Mexican standoff. I don't want to blow up this company. Ain't going to do you any good to blow up the company. How are we going to wriggle out of this somehow? How are we going to square the circle? So I've spoken around it a lot because largely because I'm talking about theory here, and the practice is, just like relationships, it is a relationship. You can't give relationship advice to any individual without knowing the particular circumstance and the particular relationships and the particular businesses and things like that. And again, going back to today's podcast, which is on my mind because I released it, Nick was talking about, the kind of businesses that really should be going towards a trade sale, the kind of businesses that should be going towards an IPO. And so even at the last stage, when you're super successful and people are going to give you $1 billion or 100 million for your company, and you're thinking, gosh, that's nice, I can buy quite a few sweeties with that. The chairman you get will very much be driven by this way or that way. Mm-hmm. You don't want a big hot-shotty chairman if you're doing a trade sale, but actually you might want some guy who isn't big hot-shotty, but has done a few trade sales before, and who knows that, someone will shake his hand, say thank you very much, and write him a check, and he'll say, all right, good luck, enjoy working for Microsoft, Nick. I'll meet you when the handcuffs come off, because that's generally what happens. Tony, I'm conscious that we're going through time. I can go a little bit over, but I don't know whether you can.
Yeah, we can go a little bit over. We've got 5 minutes. I think we can crack on for that 5 minutes, and then we'll.
Okay, so look,
thanks, Mike.
Great, no problem.
Thanks for that question. It's great.
I've skated through the overall thing. Look, the board really matters. Yep, take it from me. I've spoken to 100 people. A lot of these people are founders. Most of them are founders. They've been in pain. I found by speaking to them that you do it really well. You're super grateful, I hope to get an email from some of you guys in 3 years' time saying, I thought we were talking a load of crap, actually, Mike, and overdoing it. But actually, I found it completely right, funny enough, because it's not me being right. It's not me being right at all. This is me speaking to people and just passing on the best wisdom. Another day we'll do the sex one, but I haven't spoken to people about the sex line. So anyway, super important. Get it right. It'll make your life better. We've spoken about the board over time. We've spoken about the CEO journey and the need for emotional support and being honest. And the fact that even you've got serial founders, sometimes they're super honest with their board. And like I'm meaning about emotions as well, not just kind of, oh, by the way, we've signed this deal or not. You can't lie about that stuff. But, just looking at the book, actually, to my surprise, looking back 18 months later, within the CEO founders chapter, there's a section on faith. There's a chapter on hope. There's a chapter on friendship. So lots of actually sort of emotive words in that one. Chairman, we've spoken about. Ned's, very briefly, so we don't have to run over too much. Never hire a Ned. I wrote a blog post. I'll give you links later saying never hire a Ned. There are 9 types of Ned. Hire a certain type of Ned to fill a certain gap in your company. So, for example, you've got the trophy Ned. Ned started in the 19th century in passing, and the trophy Ned was the first type of Ned they had. They didn't exist for the 4 centuries beforehand. Anyway, the trophy Ned is somebody's, oh, wow, you've got Prince Harry on your board or something like that. Gosh, and that helps attract funds, of course, and the PR benefit. You've got the practical Ned, who's not just there to sort of flick through the papers, but they're really sort of hands-on-y people, who can help you get to sort of grips with stuff. Huge variety, by the way. I never got any consensus over what goes to the board. I got a lot of consensus over you need to put the waterline in the right place. Simple example of that is strategy. I asked loads of people, oh, is strategy for the board? And some said, oh, yes, this code says it is, definitely strategy. I got other people who said, this was a bloke actually, my board is pale, stale and male. People work in old FS. They know nothing about creativity. The last people I discussed it with a strategy. So it's a bit like the relationship. There is no one answer, but you've got to get the waterline. Practical Ned. There's the Ned on the side. Be a bit wary of the Ned on the side. Somebody is a CEO of everything. He's building up a portfolio. So when he sort of retires as CEO or gets kicked out, but really he's got a day job that's far more important than turning up for you. We've got Rolodex Neds. It can be really important to connect yourself to the wider community. And again, that's something that can last over your whole journey. As your business grows, the kind of contacts you need. Skills Ned, who bring certain skills to the company. Fundraising is an obvious one, but scale up. I've seen scale ups. Sector experience Neds. Some entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs, go into areas that they don't really understand, but they're super entrepreneurs. Well, in which case, let's say somebody's not from FS and say, oh, actually, we could do with you, Mike, because you've been there for sort of decades, and you know loads about this stuff, and you can tell me what sort of F stands for and S stands for and things like that. Entrepreneurial NEDs, and people that have been entrepreneurs for ages and they just know what it's like to be an entrepreneur. You've got your investor NEDs who tend to be there bringing money, which is good, and they can be looking after themselves, which needs balancing by the chairman. You've got control NEDs. I said at the beginning that the chances are your fire's going to go out. Nothing sort of blow up, but by the time you're at the end, you can have a huge explosion. So you do need control over time. A board needs to balance corporate creativity with corporate control. This has been a historic phrase. The problem with big companies that they're finding is that because of the governance reports and the bureaucratization of everything, it's all about corporate control. So it's killing corporate creativity. At least that creates opportunities for new fintechs and that to come along. You've got dealing with issues, Ned. Some people are good in a crisis, some people aren't. Challenge with recruiting with that one is that you only know what happens when the shit hits the fan, when the shit hits the fan. So I might think, oh, Tony's a cool dude, he'll be good in a crisis. And he may sort of, be snivelling on the floor in a crisis. You don't know. It's a bit like shock affects people in different ways. But chances are when you're going through a journey, the shit is going to hit the fan a few times. And a lot of people have said, oh, so-and-so on my board, never actually said much before, but he was fantastic in this crisis. There's actually a book. I wrote a book review about it. Came out decades ago. It's 230 or something, secondhand, called Director's Dilemmas by Patrick Dunn. It's written about 20 years ago. This guy was at 3 Eyes, and he's written a huge fat book recently on boards. But this is all about dilemmas, all about what goes wrong on companies. Good example. And then there's the far-seeing Ned. So one fintech I was speaking to said, well, actually, there was this kind of minor shift in the industry. We thought, doesn't really matter, no big deal to us. And this old wise fox really kicked up a fuss and said, look, this, and this is going to happen. People who can see a long way to the horizon. And they said, lo and behold, he was right. God, thank God he was there, because otherwise we would just sort of stumbled into it. We couldn't see over the horizon, as it were. So that's NEDs. Capital providers, you've got one coming anyway. You can do sort of a whole series on capital providers and VCs, institutional funds and strategic investors and all that kind of jazz. And then you've got a whole series of ways in which that fixing broken boards. In the book, I write about many types of broken board and how do you fix it. But just to wrap up, and then we can answer any residual questions. Hopefully, because I may have mentioned it once or twice, you've got the impression that the board's really important. Not just because you're supposed to have it because the lawyers say and you'll end up in a chain gang. If you're in a chain gang, it will really cramp your style as an entrepreneur. No, it's really important in a startup for the antithetical reasons that it's important to the big listed company. It's there to help you grow your little fire, and spread your fire and support you. So the board is super important. Do try and do it right. It will change over time. To Chris's point, you can only work with what you can work with. When I was 15, a certain kind of girl would go out with me, and 15 years later, when I was sort of managing director of Climeworks or whatever it was, running a business, you go out with different ones in the same way. If I was a supermodel, which I'm not, I'm sure I could find a gentleman with a Ferrari. So you can only attract the people you can attract at your state at each stage. But attracting people, seducing people, absolutely core talent of an entrepreneur. You won't build a business. And in that regard, if you just think of an organogram, as I say, the chairman of the board is above you, the people are below you. In that way, it's no different. It's just in the way that seducing a CTO is different from seducing and attracting a CMO, in the same way chairman and NEDs and advisors. Anyway, a quick tour d'horizon. And I think we've covered quite a bit. And anybody who wants to read 120,000 words on this can buy the book. And I've got some free slide shares, but we'll mention at the end, as well as a bunch of office.
Well, listen, that was fantastic, Mike. There was an outpouring there of wisdom. I don't know how you retained your voice, because that was almost an hour of shared wisdom there. So thank you. Yeah, I thought so. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, I'll just ask Natalia to put the slide up, which has got your details on. But in the meantime, while she's doing that, thanks, buddy. That was really great. And I know that there's lots of different ways we can connect with you. And I know you're going to be coming into Rise as well. And I do realise the importance of a board. A friend of mine was saying the other day, who was also ex-military like me, he said the biggest drawback in war, let alone in business, is good communication. And he said the dilemma he's having as a CEO of a company is how often he should have board meetings because they always want information. They always want feeding. But he said it's all about comms. So
yes,
yeah.
well, no, that's a very important question. And again, there's no one answer. It's a question of where you are at the stage. So at the beginning, if we got a new code tomorrow, every 3 months is fine. But having formal contact with your board members or your advisors during that process, as time goes by, especially before IPOs and that, you'd want it monthly. And actually, you're talking about ex-military. It reminds me that the chap that wrote the foreword to my book, Brian Basham, who in 1975 he borrowed 50 quid and he created Financial Dynamics, London's first financial PR agency, and was for many years on the Times Rich List. He had either as a chairman or as a senior non-exec, I can't remember. He said this guy was the most invaluable, and so I miss him to this day. An ex-SAS guy, and he said this guy is exactly who you want next to you in a crisis, and he said there are always crises.
My goodness. Well, I think Natalia's gone missing in action, but how can people get in touch with you? So
LinkedIn, you may have heard of it. Clarity.fm, and in terms of the slide shares I was mentioning, you can go to SlideShare and type in Mike Baliman, or theunlistedboard.com is my main website on this, theunlistedboard, all one word, .com. There are various slide shares there on the relationship between the chairman and the CEO, on the types of non-executives, and various blogs, articles there on some of these topics we've mentioned, or just go to Amazon and type in Mike Baliman. The book Realpolitik of the Small Company Board, the Unlisted Company Board, yeah, the Realpolitik of the Unlisted Company Board, making your board an engine of growth. It's currently got 17 out of...
it's there, it's up there now.
There it's got 17 out of 17 stars on Amazon, so I keep being anxious about getting the first 4-star review.
Well, I don't know if you want to say anything else, Grace, but that was just fantastic. Thanks very much, buddy.
Just a massive thank you. Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike, and for the advice. Thanks.
That's great. And of course, this will be going out. We have recorded this, so it will be going out on all our social networks. But last but not least, cheers, buddy. It was awesome.
Live long and prosper.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks, Mike. Cheers.
Thank you.